I find the actions of these music executives beyond atrocious. Too many people, mainly entertainers, black entertainers, try to ignore or cover the music executives' anti-blackness. You see how they smile and dance for the camera? You notice how at the start of their career, I'm talking about a lot of non-black music executives, which the majority of music executives are non-black, but at the beginning of their career, they surround themselves with black artists. Then when they arrive, so to speak, shoot up to the top of the executive chain, their staff, decision-making staff, people underneath them mainly look like them. Aren't y'all tired of being high-paid field slaves? I'll be back. Hey everyone, thank you so much for showing up. Let's jump into this real quick. Yes, before I discuss Whitney Houston, I would like to say something about Phyllis Hyman. I was searching for a couple of days for something that would intrigue me. So I know if it intrigues me, I'm pretty sure it's going to intrigue you guys. Well, I hope it does. I found something, but it wasn't a lot. It was a little something that I'm going to share with you guys. It's something that she supposedly said on some platform years ago before she left this earth under suspicious circumstances. So let me share what she said. This is Phyllis Hyman speaking about Clive Davis. Clive Davis taught me to never be afraid because I was so terrorized by him. Whether he meant to do it or not, I'll never know. But he sure taught me that if you try to terrorize me again, well, we can't say that on public radio. What I might do to someone who tries to hurt me like that again in this business, I'm not having it. I should be respected as I respect, and I will not have someone try to ruin my spirit and ruin my career. If Clive Davis, if his plan was to destroy my career, it didn't work. Now, it's understood, or it's been circulated throughout the industry and made its way to the public, that Clive and Hyman had a very toxic relationship, business relationship. I don't know too much about the personal side, but they had a toxic business relationship. He wanted to control every aspect of her career and life. She refused to let him. Hyman frequently voiced her overall dislike about the music industry as a whole concerning black people. Check out what she said.
My work. And in the entertainment field where blacks generate billions of dollars, we don't often get the opportunity to reap the benefits from that money traded on my work. And in the entertainment field where blacks generate billions of dollars, we don't often get the opportunity to reap the benefits from that money.
If I had known what it was going to be like, I never would have gone into it. It's much harder. The sacrifices are much more extensive.
And I found a little something else about her. It starts off with, woo, child. These music executives really couldn't handle a secure black woman who was not willing to be controlled or manipulated. Those of you who don't know, Clive took an interest in Phyllis when her Buddha contract was absorbed into his company, Arista, in the early 1980s. He thought she was beautiful and a very talented vocalist, and he wanted to make her a huge star. He got Barry Manilow to produce records for her, and he wanted Phyllis to change her image and sing the kind of songs he thought would make her a huge star. Music, Phyllis didn't particularly care for. He believed in her talent, but Phyllis was not the type of woman to take orders from a man about her look or sound. She was opinionated, and Clive labeled her as an angry black woman and difficult. Clive didn't want Phyllis to act, and she did it anyway, starring in Sophisticated Ladies, which earned her a Theatre World Award and a Tony nomination. Clive didn't understand the acting business like he did the music business and deemed it a waste of her time and a distraction. Phyllis was known for her Afrocentric Nefertiti hats and plunging gowns. Clive wanted Phyllis to dye her hair blonde and dress in a different manner to appeal to the masses. Phyllis was bipolar and very sensitive, so she took his suggestions for her to change to mean she wasn't good enough the way she was. She was not willing to change and thought her voice was enough. Clive was not happy that Phyllis didn't give in to his demands, so he tried to sabotage her career by not promoting her albums and focusing his attention on Angela Bofill, whom Phyllis did not get along with at the time. Read the book on Phyllis called Strength of a Woman if you want more in-depth tea on her and Clive's blow-ups. She finally asked to be released from her contract in 1984 when he was grooming Whitney in a manner in which he wanted to present Phyllis to the world. Phyllis went on to sign with Philadelphia International Records and released her beloved album Living All Alone in 1986, and that album was I think that was one of the only albums I bought. Actually, at the time that it came out in 86, yeah, they were still doing albums and cassettes. If you know, you know. And then a lot of people, of course, they believe that Clive has something to do with her death other than what they're suggesting, that she took her own life. I know when I first heard that she was no longer on earth anymore, it really hit me in a way I didn't expect it to. I didn't like it because I liked her music. Even at the time, I didn't know why I felt the way I did, but it felt strange. So, at the time in the 80s, I didn't know too much about how dark the music industry, although we were kind of learning a little bit about it, but not as much as we do now. But yeah, I was very suspicious and still suspicious. Clive, I don't understand why he's not brought up in these, why he's not being invested. Diddy, Sean Combs, if this message should get to you in any kind of way, tell on that mofo, because I'm sure if he was locked up, he would have told on you. The first 10 minutes he was sitting under them feds, he would have told on you. So now let's get into Whitney Houston. Remember that time Whitney said this and the world just never forgot?
No, what is it? Diane, tell me. Do you know?
It's scary, Them.
I can believe what you feel. I can believe that. But do you really know? Do you really know?
No, you know.
Thank you.
That it's because of drugs?
No.
Whitney dying. Crack rehab fails.
First of all, let's get one thing straight. Crack is cheap. I make too much money to ever smoke crack. Let's get that straight, okay? We don't do crack. We don't do that. Your crack is whack. We don't do that. Your crack is whack.
And I never forgot the message that she gave us that day. Crack is whack. Now let's get into the article I discovered. I believe it was written 2017. Much like last year's Academy Award winning documentary OJ Made in America, again this was written in 2017, it raises difficult questions about race and arrives at the conclusion that there was a psychological cost to being a black superstar whose image was created with the express purpose of maximum crossover. They always do that with black folks. You notice that? Not just black people. Any non-white person, they always have to be concerned about crossover. If you're white in the pop music, they don't care if you cross over to R&B or black folks like you. They really don't care. But if black people like you, that's a plus for them, and it's more money. and more popularity. But if you're a non-white person, you have to be concerned about crossing over. And I think that's I believe it's an insult, because they're basically telling you you're not good enough. You have to appease a certain group of people, and once you appease them, then you have arrived. I think it's an insult and a slap in the face. It doesn't matter how beautiful your voice is. If you don't appeal to a certain demographic, you ain't ish. That's what they're basically telling you. Let's go on. Every Little Step, a recent book by Houston's ex-husband, the R&B singer Bobby Brown, also takes the position that Miss Houston's sexuality was part of her struggle. Her marriage to him, he suggests, gave her the ability to reclaim her blackness while holding on to a basic image of straightness. Wow. I think I got his book on my Kindle years. I have never read it. I guess I will now. Let's continue. They couldn't let Whitney live the life she wanted to live. They insisted that she be perfect, that she be someone else, Mr. Brown writes. That's why they wanted Robin out. He named them Clive Davis and her family. So Clive Davis and her family wanted Whitney to stay in the closet. They didn't want that money to be messed up. After all, they want men to lust after the women, and they want the women to lust after the men. That's why they want these artists to stay in the closet. It's about money. It's always about money. They don't care about you. They don't care about your psyche. They don't care. Let's continue. Downstairs at the Beverly Hilton Hotel on February 11th, 2012, black cars delivered celebrities, among them Serena Williams, Britney Spears, Gayle King, to Clive Davis' annual Grammys party. Upstairs in room 434, the coroner's office tended to the body of his biggest star, Whitney Houston, who had been found dead in the bathtub earlier that day. Police investigators removed empty bottles of liquor while the wails of her daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, could be heard down the hall. And my thing is, why didn't that bastard stop that party? That was a major disrespect. Not because of how huge of a star Whitney is, but just for a person, period. If you had this long relationship with this woman, and of course she made you more rich, where was the respect? He should have got kicked in his ass with some steel-toe boots on. And I mean it exactly like that. Right in the crack of it. Let's continue. Shaka Khan later went on CNN and said Mr. Davis's decision to proceed with his party was an act of complete insanity. Mr. Davis, 85, is a legend in the music business. He signed Janis Joplin in 67, turned Barry Manilow into a star in 75, and orchestrated the reinvention of Aretha Franklin in 80. Others he worked with over the years included Patti Smith, Alicia Keys, Bruce Springsteen, Simon and Garfunkel, Lou Reed, and Carly Simon. But there were singer-songwriters perceived in the industry as being the architects of their own careers. Miss Houston was different. Mr. Davis signed her in 83 when she was just 19 years old, and he played an essential role on all but one album she recorded over the next 29 years. He brought her songs and scouted producers. He introduced her to publicity events. He repeatedly extolled her supremacy over Mariah Carey. At the peak of her life, she secured his place as an industry titan. In death, she hunts his legacy. This past April, a documentary about him, Clive Davis, the soundtrack of our lives, based on his own memoir and available next week on Apple Music, this was done in 2017, opened the Tribeca Festival. A great party was given at Radio City Music Hall. Jennifer Hudson sauntered through the crowd singing a medley of Miss Houston's greatest hits. Then came mixed reviews and the debut at the festival, A Whitney Can I Be Me, a contrasting documentary that casts Miss Houston as a victim of the music business' most base inclinations. It is currently airing on Showtime. Kenneth Reynolds, who worked at Arista, the label founded by Davis, on which Miss Houston made a career, recounts how material that was too black sounding was sent back. Kirk Whalum, who played saxophone on several of Miss Houston's tours, describes a woman who became devastated to learn that black people were calling her Whitney and a sellout. Mr. Davis isn't the principal villain in this other film. There is much blame directed at Miss Houston's mother, the gospel singer Cissy Houston, and various members of the Houston clan who had been on her payroll for many years, but still. Another powerful component of this documentary is the on-camera testimony of more than a half dozen colleagues of Miss Houston's who say that the singer's spiral into addiction had as much to do with her sexuality as it did with race. See how this country can mess black folks up so bad that some of them become turned out on dope and everything else because it's just like a constant tug of war on their psyche. But they say it's not about race, right? It's psychological games. So America plays such deviant, dark psychological games on everybody. Let's continue. Miss Houston's relationship with Robin Crawford, an essential person in her camp from before Miss Houston became famous until '99, was the subject of speculation and gossip. Now the narrative that the two were lovers had gained real currency even without confirmation from Miss Crawford. Mr. Reynolds, who toured the country with Miss Houston during the promotion of her debut album, described her lesbianism as an open secret at Arista during those early years. Bobby Brown basically said that Whitney Houston's sexuality was a part of her struggle, as well as her blackness. And then he also said that they wouldn't let Whitney live the life she wanted to live. He said that about Clive and her family. Let's go on. An artist can be extremely gifted and yet remain unsuccessful if he or she records the wrong music or gets an image that confuses potential audiences. That's from Clive. From Clive inside the music business. Mr. Davis' 1974 memoir about his time at CBS Records. Being out as a lesbian or bisexual certainly would have confused audiences in '85, said the actress and comedian Rosie O'Donnell, who knew Miss Houston and Miss Crawford socially and said she had no doubt that they were together and that what they had was real. Miss Crawford declined to speak for this article and did not submit to an interview for Whitney Can I Be Me. Back then, Miss O'Donnell said there was no Ellen, there was no Will and Grace. Lois Smith was my publicist and she was Whitney's publicist. When I would go to a show or the Emmys with my girlfriend Kelly, Lois would literally sit between us. She wasn't doing it to be mean to Kelly, she was trying to protect me. Among the first of Miss Houston's contemporaries to come out was the country singer Katie Lang, who declared she was a lesbian in 1992. A few months later, Melissa Etheridge followed suit. But it was another half of a decade until Ellen DeGeneres and Rosie O'Donnell broke the news, and they waited until shortly before their television shows went off the air to do so. That was how it happened back then with the biggest stars. If it happened at all, you did it when you had enough money to walk away from the machine, or you used a decline to propel yourself into a life of paid appearances at gay pride parades. Whitney was the first evidence I had that people were willing to acquiesce to whatever it was in order to hold on to an image that wouldn't offend, because at the time it meant you wouldn't have a career in show business, Miss O'Donnell said. None. Yet it wasn't until 2013 that Mr. Davis acknowledged what many had known for a while. that after 2 marriages and 4 children, he had a male partner. The New York Times reviewer who panned his second memoir wrote, "Though we do not hear about his failed first marriage, his second and its aftermath go MIA for several hundred pages before he awkwardly cops to being bisexual and in a strong monogamous relationship for the last 7 years with another man." Mr. Davis's life is a story, and he's a dazzling character in it. It's his tainted glasses, his snazzy suits, and apparent fondness for telling tales again and again. Life is a rolling press junket. That some of those stories do not track, are dated, and appear false in their face matters little. He probably didn't wind up as a co-writer of Air Supply's All Out of Love by being principally concerned with the opinions of skeptics. Most of Mr. Davis's contemporaries who became label heads started as music men. Mr. Davis is a former lawyer, and his corporate sensibilities poke through the material he released, particularly at Arista. When Aretha Franklin traded in the analog soul sound and distinctly political edge of her work at the Atlantic for the connoisseurist synthetic pop of Arista, the Washington Post described her first album there by saying, "The Queen of Soul seems to be striving for a new role, the Queen of Sap." Wait a minute. Wait, what is that? Hold on, I didn't see that coming. I'm hearing these articles sometime for the first time, and that's crazy. I know she was hot. She was hot as fish grease. She was like, "Get the mofos on the phone right now, or I'm going to drive up to that office." Let's go on. The effect was sad, but few could deny Mr. Davis had an ear. Carly Simon also had a comeback with Arista. She adores Mr. Davis, who had some great advice for her over the years, but she also said his energy, his testosterone, all his hormones were ignited by having the biggest #1 records, she added. He is on the side of the winner at all costs, and the cost can be very high. The cost can be somebody's career or somebody's innateness. Mr. Davis grew up in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn, where he was a member of the high school honor society, which was called Arista. While he was in college at New York University, his parents died in close succession. It was devastating, but the loss turned out to be propulsive. "Life can change on a dime," he said. After Harvard Law School, he worked at a law firm, then joined CBS Records, later Columbia, in 1960 as one of the two-house lawyers. At the time, his main business was classical music, Broadway cast albums, and middle-of-the-road pop singers. But profits were dropping. Mr. Davis understood that the future was in rock and roll. Within 7 years, at 35, he was running a label. I wonder what he did to get that position. Let's go on. At the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, he heard Janis Joplin and described it as almost like finding religion. Yet when he came to Columbia's office and suggested that they seal the deal with a trip to bed, Mr. Davis demurred. In 1968, she finished her first album, and Mr. Davis thought that its single, "Piece of My Heart," was too long and didn't repeat the chorus enough. He went into the studio and re-edited it for radio on his own. He played his version for Janis Joplin and gently coaxed her into allowing the label to release it. It went gold. The album sold more than 1 million copies, and the myth of the great and powerful Clive, a man with no musical training and supreme ears, was underway. He was devastated when Joplin died in 1970. "Our fortunes were intertwined," he writes in his first memoir. "It was a terrible loss." I'm sure it was, Clive. I'm sure it was to you. Let's continue. But it went beyond the personal. It would be wrong to pretend I wasn't upset over the commercial loss as well, he adds in the memoir. The music business is a business. Over the next 5 years, CBS, now called Columbia, signed Santana, Earth, Wind and Fire, Blood, Sweat and Tears, and Liza Minnelli. Mr. Davis entered into a promotion and distribution deal with the Philadelphia International, which moved the company into R&B and disco with great success. Then a reckoning followed when a Newark federal grand jury investigation was convened to look into the practice of industry payola. The IRS service obtained financial records. Promotion checks sent by Columbia to Philadelphia International had been used to illegally supply money and drugs to radio programmers. And I did the video last year. I re-uploaded the video this year. I think it's called The Three Puppeteers or something like that. It's talking about Clive, Harrell, and what's his name? Russell Simmons. I'm going to attach it to this video. And it was an article I found that was written in the 70s about, Clive being investigated. But you see how that got swept under the rug, right? Let's go on. Diddy learned this from Clive and some other folks. Oh, and Russell as well, and Harrell. Man, they all need to go down. Stop letting them hide behind Diddy. Let's go on. Mr. Davis also ended up in a muddle in which a mafia-acquainted head of artist relations dummied up false expense reports, included one for $18,000 for the Plaza Hotel bar mitzvah of Mr. Davis' son Fred, billed as a party for Miss Minnelli. Other violations included airfare for 2 of Mr. Davis' pet beagles. Mr. Davis was charged with 6 counts of tax evasion and pleaded guilty to 1 count. He maintains that he did nothing wrong besides relying on someone who went too far on his unknowing behalf. It was a witch hunt, he said, and many agree. Payola was never proven, but he was still fired. That's because he was an attorney and he knew how to hide things that needed to be. He is so disgusting. Let's go on. In Frederick Danin's 1990 book, Hitmen, Power Brokers, and Fast Money Inside the Music Business, Arthur Taylor, who dismissed Mr. Davis from his job, explained that the cause of the firing was that Mr. Davis had been offered the opportunity to come clean on the expense account issues and responded with lies. There's something so strange about Clive Davis, says Mr. Danin, speaking now. He has had one of the most remarkable careers in the music business, and yet so much about it is tainted. Did you hear that? He said Clive has had the most remarkable career in the music business, yet so much about it is tainted. The man who worked with the man said this. Here's the man who fired. Let's go on. Not just by the payola thing, but by his need for attention. It may be that Clive's biggest talent is his ability to distort reality. Who comes to mind? Who comes to mind? Diddy. I think Diddy's reality is distorted. That man was living in the world for about 30-something years thinking that he was God and he could do whatever he wanted to. Let's go on. Determined to rebuild his reputation, Mr. Davis took over a small label called Bell Records in 1974 and renamed it Arista. He signed Patti Smith and Lou Reed, but his principal success in the early years came from middle-of-the-road singers. Enter Barry Manilow and Melissa Manchester, both of whom sold loads of albums at their peak, yet subsequently seemed to lose part of their souls as Mr. Davis relentlessly molded their image and their music to his liking. So he did it to everybody, not just black folks, huh? He was the devil. Let's go. We could not find a comfortable way to communicate, Miss Manchester said, as my albums progressed, I had to fight harder and harder to get a place for my songs, which was weird because I come in thinking he liked what I did as a singer-songwriter and he wanted me to be a vocalist for songs that I thought were rather bland and simply loud. He always wanted me to be current and I always wanted to be timeless. It's a different way of looking at the same picture. Mr. Manilow has similar issues. When he first started out, he wrote pop songs with contemplative lyrics about broken marriages. Then he met the label head, who Mr. Manilow said in a memoir looked more like a banker than a music man. And he told him that his music was nice but needed hits. Mr. Davis started delivering him other people's songs to sing. I'll write the songs despite the title was one. Another was Brandy, later changed to Mandy. These cemented Mr. Manilow's status as the grieving straight guy who couldn't get over a lost love. It was hard for Mr. Manilow to know what to think. He was a giant success, yet he was miserable. He wrote in his diary, "Why am I angry?" In 1981, Mr. Manilow and Mr. Davis had a tense meeting. In it, Mr. Davis says Mr. Manilow complained that he was turning into a milquetoast Andy Williams. Mr. Davis responded, "Well, if you were Irving Berlin, we would know it by now." So Mr. Manilow left the label, although not before someone handled the rumors of him being gay by saying that he was living with a female production assistant named Linda Allen. Then his first album with RCA bombed and he returned. Mr. Manilow finally came out in 2017, many years after returning to Mr. Davis' stable. The sabbatical was fortuitous. It helped him get a different perspective and cherish the partnership, Mr. Davis said. Why is it that it seemed like all these people in Hollywood end up gay? Is that like a part of the criteria? Okay, let's go on. There's this eternal argument between the part of us that wants to be an artist and the part of us that wants to be a success, Miss Simon said. The success part often wins. Mr. Davis never liked being called a Svengali for what he did with Miss Houston. He thought that sounded slithery. Still, it's hard to describe their collaboration without leaving that impression. They met in '83 at the behest of Gary Grifton, who worked in Arista's A&R department. Miss Houston was born near housing projects in Newark. Her family moved to the more middle-class East Orange, New Jersey, when Cissy's, Miss Houston's mother and a backup singer for Elvis Presley, and Aretha Franklin began enjoying success. As a child, Whitney sang gospel with the New Hope Baptist Choir. She was unsure of herself with a tendency to sing in the back. Cissy had some ambivalence about whether her daughter should become an entertainer, but she nevertheless told her that if she was going to sing, she better step up. By 16, she was singing with Cissy on Chaka Khan's disco masterpiece, Clouds. Whitney may not have known then what the bargain of fame would feel like, but she knew where she was headed. "I was always going to be a star," she later said. So a showcase for Mr. Davis was set up. Her performance that night were standards, Home, From the Wiz, and then The Greatest Love of All. They were knockouts, Mr. Davis said. She had the entire package. Miss Houston was beautiful. She had great power as a singer, but beyond that, he said, she had a level of self-control that was remarkable. If she did not have great ambition to become a songwriter, a thing critics subsequently used to discount her artistry, Miss Houston knew exactly what she was singing about. When she did runs, it was usually because the lyrics called for it. Mr. Davis' recollection is that he talked with Miss Houston around that time about music. And she told him Lena Horne and Dionne Warwick, who was her cousin and already at Arista, were her favorite singers. Later, Miss Houston would say her favorites growing up were Aretha Franklin, Chaka Khan, Natalie Cole, which is a big difference. Who knows which versions of the story is true? Which version of the story is true? Miss Houston, like Mr. Davis, was never the world's most reliable narrator. 2 weeks after Mr. Davis signed her, he went on the Merv Griffin show and introduced his protege to the world. She hadn't recorded a song yet, but that was how much he believed in her. Also, he loved going on television. Making her debut album took nearly 2 years. Mr. Davis said the idea back then was to build her appeal in both the pop and R&B markets. But Mr. Reynolds said there was never any question which was more important. Arista was a pop-oriented label, Mr. Reynolds said. That's what the staff knew, and that's what Clive knew. That's what he did best. And he did it better than most record executives. There was no platform for Aretha Franklin's Ain't No Way on Arista. They needed Aretha Franklin doing Who's Zooming Who, and Whitney Houston doing Greatest Love of All, and Billy Ocean doing Caribbean Queen, because the bigger the pop record, the more money you could make. And when Whitney Houston came out in '85 and turned into the biggest selling debut album in history, the principles involved did make sense. 3 songs went #1 on the Hot 100. She won a Grammy in the pop category for Saving All My Love for You, but lost in the R&B category for You Give Good Love, a clear indication of the success of the appeal for white audiences. And when that song, when those 2 songs came out, it was on and popping. I remember when they came out, it was like nobody could stop playing the songs. That's how bummed they were. It was like, oh my God, who is this woman? And then when a video came out, oh my goodness, it was just like, if you saw you had to be in the 80s to feel what I'm expressing. It was like so huge, her songs, and then see it on video, to see who this woman was who was singing that song. It was a different time, man. It was a different time. It was just brought to my attention. My sister heard me editing this, and she was saying, wait a minute, everybody in the hood was playing those 2 songs. It was like I said, you couldn't go anywhere and not hear black people playing those songs, and the DJs would be so, when they were announced that those songs or one of those songs was about to play, they would be so excited. Everybody wanted to know who Whitney Houston was. So I'm thinking that because Clive is so evil and he wanted to control everything she did, I think he set it up for her to lose in R&B so she could be disappointed with the black audience, and so she could just solely focus on pop. I think he set it up that way. I think this man is worse than Diddy. And his filth is gonna come pouring out worse than Diddy. Let's continue. By the time Mr. Griffin, the man who found Miss Houston, had quit his job working for Mr. Davis, he only saw the big numbers. That was just his mindset, Mr. Griffin said. It's like hiring our current president to run a label. That's why I could not agree with everything he was doing. That's why I left. Mr. Davis apparently felt more warmly about Mr. Griffin. He later hired him back. In '87, Miss Houston's follow-up arrived, and the first 4 singles all hit 1, making her the first artist in history to have had 7 consecutive chart toppers. I was like, Whitney, are you pinching yourself? And she said, yeah, Clive, I'm pinching myself, Mr. Davis said. It's a story he loves to tell, but the tale was abbreviated. The reviews for the follow-up album were brutal. John Perilous in the New York Times said it smacked of corporate perfectionism. The Los Angeles Times' Robert Hilburn called it a considerable disappointment. Behind the scenes, Miss Houston was dealing with a family who increasingly depended on her and whose appetites turned out to be nearly bottomless. She made her father her manager and bought her mother a house. They had divorced after their daughter was famous. Whitney was taught to do some very serious drugs in the 80s by her brother, Michael. It was Robin Crawford who went to Cissy Houston's house to say there was a problem with drugs. Cissy, a Christian who still sang in church, had separate issues with the idea her daughter was gay. She wasn't open to staging an intervention with Miss Crawford and decided to deal with her daughter's problem on her own. Mr. Davis seemed equally disinclined to address Miss Houston's sexuality or what effect hiding it may be having on her happiness or psychological health. He said he has no idea whether Miss Houston was gay. He never discussed it. And he said he went on to list the romances she supposedly had in the 80s with Jermaine Jackson and Eddie Murphy. Oh, nonsense, Mr. Dannon said. Put that on record. I remember going to a lunch party for one of her albums when I was writing Hitman. It was all anybody could talk about. Clive didn't know. Of course he knew. Rosie O'Donnell said, for Clive Davis to claim ignorance about this, I believe a bold-faced lie. When asked about this, Mr. Davis said that any implication he orchestrated a cover-up around Miss Houston's sexuality or that he did not want her to be herself was crazy. And it's crazy that he thinks somebody will believe him. Let's go on. I'm telling the truth, he said. Did I read that there was speculation? I did. And then by him saying I'm telling the truth, you know he was lying. Let's go on. When you're telling the truth, you don't have to say I'm telling the truth. There was never a discussion between me and Whitney about any kind of romantic relationship with Robin, he said. There was never an indication that there was. Mr. Davis added that he first became aware there was a drug problem sometime around 2000. In April 89, Miss Houston and Miss Crawford attended the Soul Train Music Award at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. When Houston's name was announced among the nominees for Best R&B Urban Contemporary Single Female, a loud booing could be heard in the audience. I was there, said the producer Kenny Edmonds, known as Babyface. We talked about it because we were all a little shocked. She was very upset. That was the night she met Mr. Brown for the first time. He sat in front of her and also performed, gyrating on the stage while singing My Prerogative. Miss Houston flirted with him a little, then invited him to her 26th birthday party in New Jersey. Miss Houston and Mr. Davis also hired Babyface and his partner L.A. Reid to work on her third album, I'm Your Baby Tonight. The irony is that if she was trying to go blacker, I don't know that we were the guys to go to. Mr. Edmonds says, we were in the middle, but maybe that's why Clive called us in the first place. In 92, Miss Houston and Mr. Brown were married in New Jersey. The morning of the wedding, Mr. Brown walked into Miss Houston's bedroom, he writes in his memoir, hoping for a quickie with his bride-to-be. He found her hunched over a bureau doing a line of coke. So he joined in, thinking to himself what good fortune it was to have found someone like her. She was classy and street at the same time, he writes. Then came the ceremony where the maid of honor was Miss Crawford. By now, Miss Houston was promoting what would become her biggest commercial vehicle yet, The Bodyguard, a new movie she had just filmed with Kevin Costner. It was to be a great event, America's black sweetheart and Hollywood's most famous white Republican, at least back then. Falling in love on the screen and what seemed like a marketing team's decision to build a movie around as many demographics as possible. Thanks in large part to Miss Houston's brilliant performance of Dolly Parton's I Will Always Love You for the film, the movie earned $411 million at the box office. At the global box office. Even the wedding to Mr. Brown became part of the film's promotion plan. As Miss Houston submitted with Miss Crawford to interviews with ABC News and USA Today, where they explained that they had not been lovers but were simply best friends. I think once she's married, she'll feel a lot more complete, Miss Crawford said. I think that'll be a self-phase where she'll be doing something for her life. One might assume Miss Crawford would have made an exit soon after the wedding. Instead, she remained for 7 years as part of a management team, locked with Mr. Brown and what several people in Whitney Cannot Be Me describe as the battle for the ear of Miss Houston. During that time, Mr. Davis receded someone from the picture. Miss Houston starred in films that grapple more directly with Black American issues, but descended further into her own addiction. Whatever had led Miss Houston to pick Mr. Brown, their addictions helped make it real. It may have seemed dysfunctional, but that doesn't say anything about whether they loved each other, Mr. Edmonds said. She loved him like crazy, and he loved her like crazy. She suffered an overdose during the making of the 95 film, Waiting to Exhale. Then she pulled out of big promotional appearances for The Preacher's Wife because of throat issues. Around that time, Miss Houston gave a rare interview. Money doesn't make you happy, she said. Fame certainly doesn't make you happy. People will tell you that who are famous, you got to find the happiness within yourself. You've got to know who you are before you step into this business, because if you're trying to find it, you'll probably wind up being somebody else that you probably don't even like. In 97, Mr. Davis' patience ran out. He wrote her a letter. Dearest Whitney, you know my love for you goes beyond the professional nature of our relationship, which in and of itself is almost as long as the age you were when I met you. I'm seriously concerned. I know that I have absolutely no right to reflect on anything but your professional recording career, so let me address that. You have not done a studio album in 7 years. You have only recorded a total of 7 pop songs during the last 5 years, and those were chosen to integrate into the characters of 2 motion pictures. So, insofar as your position as the #1 contemporary recording artist in the world is concerned, you have been practically missing in action. Soon enough, Houston was back in the studio working on My Love Is Your Love, an album that burst with collaborations with edgy producers like Missy Elliott, Lauryn Hill, Wyclef Jean, and Rodney Jerkins, who delivered her a song about being in a messy marriage with a man who can't stop cheating on her. It got some of the best reviews of her career, but the tour was another story. The problem wasn't the voice, but her marriage's increasingly Mr. and Miss Smith-like qualities. The situation finally broke Miss Crawford, who determined it was time to quit the family business. She ultimately settled down with Lisa Hintelman, a former magazine editor who works as the director of talent and entertainment partnerships at Audible. Afterward, Miss Houston's former bodyguard, David Roberts, speaking in Whitney, Can I Be Me, Miss Houston descended further. The following year, Burt Bacharach fired her from a performance at the Oscars when Houston began singing the wrong song during her rehearsal. She abruptly pulled out of her performance at Mr. Davis' induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In September 2001, she popped on stage at a tribute concert for Michael Jackson, looking so thin that the sounds of people gasping could actually be heard throughout the arena. Mr. Davis tried to help. After the Oscars debacle, he invited her to come stay at his weekend home. He gently brought up her drug use. She told him she had it under control, that it was her business. After the Michael Jackson show, he wrote her another letter begging her to get treatment, telling her now he'd seen her on television and cry. She never responded. By then, Mr. Davis had been pushed out of Arista by his corporate higher-ups and was setting up another new label. That left Houston behind. Her 2002 album tanked. She gave a disastrous interview to Diane Sawyer in which Miss Houston explained in a moment that became notorious that she did not smoke crack. Crack is cheap, she said. I make too much money to ever smoke crack. She described Mr. Davis being removed at Arista as a tremendous source of pain. That hurt, she said, a lot. They did reunite, and she got divorced and released an album, I Look to You, with Mr. Davis once again listed as executive producer. But the combination of cocaine and years of heavy cigarette smoking had taken their toll. With her fortune diminishing and her family ever depended on her, she agreed to stage a tour. It was a disaster. Yet Mr. Davis was pleased to see Miss Houston when she arrived in Los Angeles in 2012, the week of the Grammys. The way he remembers it, she seemed sober as they chatted by the pool at the Beverly Hills Hotel where he was staying. She told him that she had finally quit smoking and she would be ready to record again that summer. She also said she was swimming daily. But later that week, Miss Houston went out for a night on the town with her daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, and left a nightclub with her leg bleeding after an altercation with a woman she believed was making a move on Ray J, the man she was dating. After Whitney died, the coroner's report describes some of the items in her hotel room: prescription drugs, empty liquor bottles, and a metal spoon covered in white powder. Mr. Davis did memorialize her at his Grammy event, the show that infamously went on no matter what, bringing Alicia Keys and Jennifer Hudson on the stage to perform some of Houston's songs. Then he went to Newark for her funeral. In his eulogy, he rattled off all the record-breaking statistics of her 27-year collaboration, name-checking 5 of her 11 number 1 songs, 5 more top 10 hits, 4 of her movies, and 1 earth-shattering rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. Once again, but not for the last time, he told the story about how he asked her in 1987 whether she was pinching herself at her success. Miss Crawford didn't speak that day. Instead, she published a remembrance on Esquire website. It left a lot out, but she did include her diagnosis of what happened to Whitney Houston. The record company and band members, her family, her friends, me. She fed everybody, she wrote. Deep down inside, that's what made her tired. I guess I'll just go on and say what I said to someone when they asked me how I felt about Whitney Houston dying. I remember like it was yesterday. I was at a store. And it was about, could have been in the early afternoon, like 12 or 1. And I started feeling sick, but it wasn't a physical sick. I knew it wasn't physically sick. It's like my soul, my spirit felt sick. And I just wanted to leave. I wanted to go home. So about maybe 3 hours later after that, it was announced that she was deceased, that Whitney Houston was deceased. And around the time that they announced that she was discovered or reported to be deceased, that was around the time that I was feeling sick. It just felt unbelievable. And I was hoping, and then you kept hearing about her, she was going to rehab, she was getting herself together, and it just seemed like it was never going to happen. The last time she talked about getting together, I was hoping that she would really be able to get it together. But I was thinking to myself, I don't think she's going to be able to do it in that industry. She's going to have to completely let the music industry go. That I felt that was the only way she was going to be able to live a clean, sober life. I think she was talking about doing a gospel song or whatever. A gospel album. And then boom, she was deceased. So I was telling somebody, I really feel like that shouldn't have happened. It was really bad. That shouldn't have happened. And whoever plotted it, I really don't believe that it was of her own doing. I don't believe that she was inebriated or high and drowned. I don't believe that at all. The way I felt in my spirit when they announced that she died, no. It wasn't that. Of course, it wasn't natural. I don't believe it was of her own doing. You think You think what you call is going through is something. I don't think so. I think that it's gonna be worse. I don't think it's gonna get better for a minute in this whole industry. And I'm not just talking about music. I'm talking about Hollywood, period. Television, movie, and music. They all go hand in hand. And they're all doing the same thing. You think there's no ditties in the movie industry? You think there's no ditties in TV? They're all doing the same thing. Hollywood is a small world. They all know what everybody's doing. They just hope you don't know. So they can continue to paint this fake, ridiculous image before your eyes. So you can believe, and it's so unfortunate and so sad that people actually believe it. You guys actually believe this whack image these people put before your face. So to the point where you down your own lives because you're comparing your life to these fake people. These hideous people. Some of these people, the things they do are so disturbing that they will lock them under the prison. Okay, thank you guys for your time. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. And we will see you in the next video. Take care.